Hi, my name is Andrew Henderson, and welcome to a very special Nomad Capitalist video. This video is going to be really in-depth. I've got a lot to talk about, and I have a lot to share with you about a very important topic and about a very important announcement that I wanted to make you aware of. And so this video is going to be a bit longer. It's going to be a very serious video, and it's on something that's really very important, and I think that you deserve to know about. And it's about a big decision that I have been working through in my own mind as a private citizen, separate from Nomad Capitalist for a while now. Actually for many, many, many years. And so I made some notes, unlike most of the other videos we do, that I do extemporaneously. I made some notes because there's a lot to talk about, and I want to make sure that I don't miss anything. But this is not a topic that I had planned to discuss. Partially out of respect to the parties involved, which I will talk more about later in the video, but also, out of privacy. And so I'm going to cover I think the relevant and important parts of this big announcement that you can learn from, while still hopefully maintaining the respect to the people who are involved and obviously keeping what needs to be private. But the announcement from me that a lot of people have been asking about, we've been getting this on our YouTube videos, we've been getting it on our articles. When you have over 4 million people who look at your stuff, we've been getting this question a lot, for a long time. But I think people have felt it recently. People have felt it a bit more based on some of the content we've put out. I'm here to announce that as of late in 2017, I decided to no longer be a citizen of the United States. This has been really an interesting process for me. And I think it's important to share not only the background, not only the feelings, but the process that I went through, so that hopefully some people out there can identify with this. And people can understand why I did it, and people can understand if it's something that they should do, or maybe something that they shouldn't do. I had a lot of stereotypes shattered during this process. A lot of things I didn't expect, which I'm going to talk about more in the process part. But I've been thinking about doing this for a long time. I grew up in the United States, and I would spend, when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, I had 2 big maps on my wall. One was a US map, one was a world map. And I spent most of my time looking at the world map, thinking of how I was going to live in another country, thinking of how maybe there was somewhere else that I would feel a bit more comfortable. And as you know, a number of years ago, I started traveling around. It's been about a decade now that I've been traveling around looking for where I can go and be treated best in so many ways, from personal to financial, many other things. Not purely financial, but really about personal life as well. And a couple years after starting to travel, I left the United States for good. And I can tell you that when I left the United States for good, I remember sitting with some of my friends, including one of my old business partners in the United States, and I was very upset about what was happening in the United States. I was very angry about the rules. And if you go back to the very beginning of Nomad Capitalist, late 2012, you'll see more sarcasm, more snark. We've updated a lot of those old articles that had actual information, because a lot of that information has changed. But if you look at, if you remember those days, you remember that I was more frustrated about the United States and about being a U.S. citizen, and would often speak in some sweeping generalizations, and would speak in ways that today I wouldn't want to be speaking in. And so if you go back to when I started Nomad Capitalist, and even a bit before that, I had thought, hey, do I want to be a U.S. citizen? I like it much better living overseas. I tend to connect with people better overseas. And I really started to go through the process. But I was very cognizant of the fact that, I don't want to just throw away what is a widely sought after passport just for being angry. And I think that was the important emotional decision that I made back then, is that you don't want to be angry. So fast forward a couple years, about a little over 2 years ago, I was very close to deciding to make this decision then, like late 2015. And I talked to some folks in my family, and I ran this idea past some people in a more casual way, and got some feedback, and I was about ready to go through with it. And then some things came up that actually made it somewhat beneficial to be a U.S. citizen, and I kind of went back and reevaluated and said, all right, let me put this on the back burner for now and come back to it later. And people would ask me, hey, you know, why are you still a U.S. citizen? You talk about it. And quite frankly, I always said, you know what, it's really nobody's business. I mean, I'm the Nomad capitalist. I advise people on different things they can do and how to build a Nomad capitalist strategy. But obviously, you know, what works for me may not be what works for someone else. But people asked, and I said, you know, I look at it once a year and decide if it makes sense for me. And when I went back and evaluated it this year, I just decided that it no longer made sense for me to be a U.S. citizen. And that's ultimately when I decided to go through the process. Now, before I get into what the process is, this is not something that's for everyone. I think that it's funny that, you know, among my close colleagues and friends and advisors, I've talked about this in the last 2.5 months since I've gone through the process. And one person said, oh, you know, now this is just, you're just going to be the renunciation guy. That's going to be your advice to everybody. That's going to be your thing. And I think that, you know, the emotional growth from going back years ago when the approach to doing this was much more angry is that this is not for everybody. Got together with 4 guys last week who came and we did a little mastermind. We were helping them with their plans. Had a lot of fun. One of the guys had already planned to renounce before he came to me. One of the guys, we determined that might be a good thing for him to do because he just wasn't feeling it anymore like I was. One of the other guys, you know, didn't really want to either, but was keeping the idea open. And one of the other guys said, hey, I love living in the United States. I'm just going to stay a U.S. citizen. I love the country. And I think that, you know, that was a good kind of group of people that demonstrates the different opinions that are out there. This is a decision that not only do you have to come to on your own, it has to feel right for you. But it's one that not everyone should make. Contrary to what some folks might believe, this is not really a financial decision for many people. You know, the news media likes to paint it as a bunch of rich guys who are just running off. I'll go into some of my reasons in a minute, but you have to feel right with the decision. When I talked to my former business partner a couple months ago before I made my final decision to renounce, he said, you know, you're going through the different reasons, you're going through your feelings, and he says you feel a lot more at ease, a lot more comfortable, a lot more happy, and a lot more at ease, really, with this decision than you did when you first started talking to me about it years ago. And he says, back then I would have said, Andrew, come on, you're being crazy, you're being emotional, you're overreacting, don't do it. He says, now, you know, this is a guy, my former business partner, you know, he loves living in the U.S., you know, he and I share many opinions. The Nomad capitalist stuff is not one of them. He says, you know, Andrew, you know, I'm going to live in the U.S. I'm going to be proud of the U.S. He says, but I can see for you why it doesn't make sense anymore. And he says, you know, for me, it makes sense for you just to go down this route and to no longer be a U.S. citizen. I think you'll feel a lot more comfortable that way. But it took me years of really going through the process to come to this conclusion. Now, you know, maybe there are some people for whom it is a financial decision, more so than it was for me. And for them, they can come to terms with it a lot more quickly, and that's okay too. But I think that, you know, having heard from a lot of people over the years, some of whom are kind of angry, this is not something you want to overreact to. It is an emotional decision. It is an emotional decision. And so I want to talk about the process, and I want to talk about what happened, and I want to kind of give you some insight. And I'm going to say this. I want to be very respectful to the people who are involved in this process, because one of the stereotypes that I didn't necessarily have anymore, but one of the stereotypes that a lot of people have that was shattered for me was the difficulty of doing this, or the sense of judgment of doing this, the people whom I worked with, the people who helped me with this at the U.S. level, were incredibly professional. They were incredibly non-judgmental. They were actually incredibly nice. You know, I mean, you can say, hey, you know, people who work at the State Department they're professional, they do the job. These people were actually extremely nice. And I actually felt like they actually went out of their way to help and to be kind. And that was something that I think demonstrated to me that I was ready to do this. Because if you would have asked me 5 years ago, back when I was talking to my friend and partner Matt about this, you know, the idea was I'm going to go in there and I'm going to, I'm going to give them a piece of my mind, and they're going to be angry, and nothing can be further from the truth. I was extremely professional. I was at my best, I think. They were extremely kind and helpful and really accommodating. And, you know, this idea that this process should be adversarial, I think, is not the right thing to think about. I think that we see so much media and we see so much of the general public who is angry with the quote-unquote 1%, and we project that onto the government. Quite frankly, if you're a U.S. citizen, this is your right. And I think that if you work in the State Department, you know, my impression has been that people are pretty cool with that. You get the sense, perhaps, that they would not make the same decision. After all, they're working for the U.S. government. And I respect that. And one of the things that I feel that was right for me was coming to terms with the fact that, you know, the U.S. does not have to be my enemy. Obviously, there are some people that I help for whom, you know, they have more financial motivations for doing this. And that's okay. And they may come to terms with this very quickly. But if you're someone who is upset with the way that the U.S. does business, you're upset with the way the U.S. manages its foreign policy, you're upset with the fact that you've got to fill out 1,000 forms every year, I think coming to terms and understanding that, you know, the U.S. government, you know, they don't have to be the enemy. And actually, now that I've renounced, I feel a much greater sense of peace and understanding that, you know what, I have family who lives in the United States, and that's not what I want to do, but I respect them, and I respect their decision. I don't respect all the U.S. government's policy decisions, but I have a respect that, you know, not everyone who works there is a terrible person. And I have a sense that I no longer have to be upset about it. It's no longer my circus. It's no longer my issues to deal with. And it's funny, you know, occasionally I will watch something on YouTube, I'll watch something from the U.S. news media, and I realize this is not my cross to bear anymore. I'm no longer a part of this. And the U.S. may have broader implications in other parts of the world and in the monetary system and many things, but it's no longer my cross to bear. But let me go through the process. It's, you know, rather simply, and I'll omit some of the more detailed stuff because I don't want to be seen as giving folks advice. After all, we do that here at Nomad Capitalist. But the process was quite simple. You know, the first thing I did was I spent about a week or two sitting down with family members and friends and associates and people I work with and talking about this and talking about how it would work. I decided I wanted 2017 to be the year that I would do it. You know, I just decided that it's the end of the year and I can simplify my life and go into 2018, just have a new outlook. And so I made the decision. And I contacted the embassy in a place where I live, one of the places where I live, and I arranged an appointment, and they were incredibly helpful. They said, hey, you know, if you want to come in tomorrow, we can help you. And I was traveling at the time. I was in Mexico, actually, meeting with some folks at a little meetup. And so I adjusted my travel plans to come back a bit earlier than I expected, and to get in there and get an appointment. Went and booked my appointment, and showed up, and brought a couple of forms, discussed the process, answered some of the questions. And again, it was very professional. One of the questions that I don't think that they always ask in these appointments, but they do ask sometimes, and they asked me was, you know, What's your reason? Why do you want to do this? You know, the honest thing that I told them was, you know, I just don't really feel like an American anymore. Maybe I never did. And that's an area where I think that I, as the nomad capitalist, am perhaps different from some of the folks that we help, because, you know, again, there's some people who just say, you know what, you know, I have people who, they're involved in cryptocurrency, and, you know, if you're a U.S. citizen or a U.S. resident, you can't participate in ICOs, for example, and they say, you know what, I'm losing out on millions, so I just want to renounce, and that'll solve that problem. Maybe they love the United States. I mean, obviously not enough to stay, but maybe they don't really have any of the, you know, the kind of emotions about it that I've had. But I said, you know, I don't feel American anymore, and I feel, and I haven't for some time, but I feel it now to the point where, you know what, I feel like I'm totally comfortable to do this. I've been living outside of the United States for many years now. In the last 4 years, I spent all of 6 or 7 days last summer. And it was interesting that when I went last summer, when I landed in Chicago, and then I got my bags and went out to Phoenix, where I had lived in the U.S. for a while, I went and checked into the Phoenician, my favorite hotel, in an old watering hole that I used to spend time in when I lived there. I said, you know, I feel like a tourist here. I said, it's a great hotel, great people, I can speak to them in English, we can laugh together a little bit, we had a nice time. But I said, you know, when I landed in the United States, they make you fill out that landing card, or at least they give you the card. I had global entry, but they give you that card you have to fill out, and it says, you know, where are you a resident of? And for the first time ever, since I had left the United States for the last time, I said, where am I a resident? It's really not here. You know, obviously I have residence cards in another country, but where's my real country of residence? You know, it's not here. And that's really the first time that I really had to think about it. And that feeling kind of led me to realize, you know what, this is a place that it's nice to come for a week every, who knows how often, you know, do all the kind of American stuff. I went to Denny's, you know, met some friends. But I really, for the first time, felt like a tourist, and I felt what it was like to be, you know, somebody from any other country, just visiting the United States, going to Vegas, going to New York, doing whatever, and having a nice time, and having a respect for the country, but not feeling like it was mine. And so I told the embassy, I said, you know, I don't really feel like an American. I've been out of the country for so long. I feel comfortable that, you know, if I was never able to come back, that, you know, it's nice to have the option, but I could live with that. And, you know, I didn't go into all the details. It's really nobody's business, and I won't go into all the details here, but, you know, I didn't, and I don't feel like an American. I realized that I was spending a long time building an identity. Again, not only for business reasons, but really for personal reasons, which we don't have to get into here, but for personal reasons of building an identity. And my identity, you know, when I wear a flag pin occasionally, you know, going around to meet different people, you know, it's not an American flag. And that's not out of a hatred for the U.S., but it's out of just a sense that it's not my place. Obviously, there are other reasons. One of the things that I've learned from working with folks who have renounced, some of them who had done so before they came to me for help with other stuff. But one of the things I've learned is that when you do it, it feels like a weight off your shoulders. And there is, and there always was for me, a certain sense of dread. As someone who believes in compliance, as someone who believes that, you know, it's best as a successful person to follow the law, and that's the best thing to do. I mean, you know, whether you think morally the law is right or not, I think following the law is a good idea. And if you're a U.S. citizen and you don't like the laws that being a U.S. citizen brings with it, then you have the option to do what I did and get out of the system. You know, I don't agree with people who just say, you know, bury all your, you know, put all your cryptos offline and just, you know, don't follow the rules because you can. And I'm sure that might anger some people that I'm saying that. That's okay. You know, I'm looking for people who believe that, you know, following the law, whether you like it or not, it's a good thing to do. And so for me, as someone who has that kind of Midwestern upbringing, where I grew up with, your word is your bond, you do the right thing, wanting to do the right thing, wanting to be compliant, brought with it a sense of dread. I remember a couple years ago, I went out with a girl from Iran briefly, and I just felt so uncomfortable doing that because of all the issues between the U.S. and Iran. Every year, you have to file tax returns, you have to file F-bars as a U.S. citizen. I have one bank that every time you change your debit card, you lose your debit card, you get a new one, they'd give you a new account number. And I think I had like 14 or 15 accounts, maybe not quite that many, but I had a lot of accounts at this one bank. And we went through the F-bar, and I'm like reporting account after account, and then I'm trying to figure out which balance went with which account. Well, this account had this balance, but then it went over to this. It just became so confusing. And I said, I want to do it properly. It's so difficult. And there was just this sense of dread that you've got all these different rules and regulations, and you want to follow them properly, you want to be compliant, and to the best of my knowledge, I always did. I was always my intention. I reported every bank account, reported every company. But it just became a lot to keep up with. It's a lot of papers. People think, oh, the reason is taxes. And actually, they did ask me, is this about taxes? And I was kind of confused what they meant. And they said, well, you do understand if you renounce, if you owe us money, the debt doesn't just go away. And that is true. The same as any military obligations don't go away. I have used legal strategies for myself for a long time to pay very, very little, if anything. I think that's a fair system, considering I've lived in the United States, again, all of 6 days in the last about 4 years. And, or even longer than 4 years, actually. I wasn't using any of the services. People may take issue with that, but that is the law, and I was able to basically do what people from other countries in the world do, where they leave their country and they don't really pay much, other than I had to file all these forms every year and follow all these regulations. So I legally paid, very little. It's not really about tax. I don't owe the IRS money. In fact, they recently sent me a letter saying, we actually owe you some money. But it was that sense of dread, it was the paperwork, it was just keeping up with everything. Which, if you want to be a U.S. citizen, I know guys who have come to me, they said, you know what, Andrew, yeah, I'm a citizen over here too. One guy, hey, I'm a citizen of Australia, but you know what, it's worth going through some hassles every year. I'll hire an accountant, I'll keep some records. It's worth it to be able to stay a U.S. citizen. And I'm not saying that, for me the reason was paperwork. But that's just an extra little push in the right direction for me. The real reason for me was I felt like I did not identify with the country. I didn't really need to go back and live there. I had spent years overseas, and I felt like I had a new identity. And all those things just made it more and more clear for me. Obviously, if you're a British citizen, and you don't feel British anymore, you may still keep your British passport at a convenience. But as a U.S. citizen, there's a lot of other things to consider. So they asked me, I went to the interview, they said, what are your reasons? And I told them, and we had a nice chat, and they said, listen, when you do this, it can't be undone. And they walked through some scenarios with me, and I said, I understand. They said, okay, great, you need to come back again. And so we made an appointment. Again, this embassy was very nice, and they allowed me to come back pretty shortly thereafter. And so I went out and I gave it some thought. I did some journaling, and I actually made some videos for my own use that I may or may not put out sometime in the future. But I wanted to really document how I feel. And then I went back to the embassy for the next appointment. I took the $2,350 in cash in an envelope. And when you go in, the first thing they do is they call you up and they say, "Hey, please give us the cash." And there's like a cash register that you put the money into the thing, and they put it in the cash register. And the girl, she was actually kind of cute. I thought it would kind of be a inappropriate time to say anything. You're going to a renunciation appointment. But they took my money, they gave me a receipt, and they said, "Have a seat, we'll call you up." what I learned about this process is the renunciation process is actually, I mean, it's a very dignified process. I mean, most people who go in to apply for visas, for a tourist visa, whatever, even when I was engaged a long time ago and went through the fiancé visa process, everything's done where you stand on one side of the window and you slip papers under a thing. This process is actually done in an office, and you sit there and you talk to them, and it's you know, rather dignified. And so they went through a lot of the questions again. And then it came to the part where they say, all right, raise your hand and read this oath. And it's the Oath of Renunciation. And so they read you a bunch of stuff from the paper, and then they say, all right, now you need to read this. Raise your right hand and read this. And I can tell you, and I said it was a bit emotional. At that moment, I kind of felt like it was like breaking up with somebody. Where you read it, and you're basically saying, I mean, something that's pretty serious. I mean, listen, as you know, we've talked about for many years, you know, don't necessarily think that just because you're born somewhere that you have to be in love with it, or that you have to be a patriot, or that you have to stay there forever, that you shouldn't have options. And I still believe that. But that's not to say that some of the conditioning still doesn't work its way into you at a very deep level, and that you're not going to have to fight a little bit of that off. If you've ever broken up with somebody, you know that when you're saying those words, when you're looking the person in the eye and you're saying those words, we can't be together any longer, it's a little tough. And sometimes, you know, if you're like me or like most people, you've ended a relationship with somebody that you wish it could have worked out. And under different circumstances, maybe it could have. And you get a little emotional. You know, it is emotional. And you really think about it. You really feel it when you're saying those words. And then they thank you, and they tell you that, all right, hand us your passports, please. And they were actually nice enough to say, hey, if you need them for, I actually had two. You know, if you need it for a little bit of time, we can do that. And I said, no, it's okay. It's a fair deal that, you know, when you renounce, you don't get the passport anymore. I mean, it's only fair. And then you walk out. And like any breakup, you know, you walk out, and these U.S. embassies, they're all very, you know, fortified. You walk out, it almost feels like you're walking, it feels like you're walking out of a jail almost, because they're so fortified. And then you go to the front desk, you go to the guard shack, and you get your phone back, and you get anything that you brought with you that you weren't allowed to take in, and you walk out the front door, and you take your first breath of air as essentially a non-U.S. citizen. And you realize you've got a new life ahead of you. And if you do it for the right reasons, as it took me years to come around to, and maybe it takes you less time, if this is the right decision for you, maybe it takes you less time. But you realize, kind of like breaking up, you say, you know what? It's unfortunate that it had to happen. But you realize that ultimately it will be for the best. And ultimately you can't have any regrets. You know, I've done a couple things in my life that have changed the course of my life, and some of those I still haven't seen the full result of. But I never like to have regrets. I always wanted to say, you know, I made the right decision for the time. One of the things that I was in Serbia last year, and I've made so many friends in Serbia, and I have team members from Serbia. And obviously Serbia has a history with the United States going back not so long ago in our lifetime. And I was in Serbia a couple months ago, about a month before I made the decision. I remember I was having dinner with somebody, and she was telling me the story of how she grew up with her father. Her family was from Kosovo. They moved to Serbia when she was a child, and her father moved. And she said when the war started, she said something in my father changed. And she said he lived a couple years after that. But when she was a child, her father passed away, and she said something from the war with the U.S. changed him, and it wasn't for the better. And I remember sitting there across from her and seeing her try and be strong about this, that something that obviously happened a long time ago, but still impacts her and impacted her family and changed her family. And that really crystallized for me something that is easy to say in theory. It's easy to say that, hey, you know, we don't agree with what the United States does. And obviously that being an American doesn't mean agreeing with everything the United States does, but as someone who had no longer really held that identity of being American, I remember sitting there with her and feeling that this was really not part of my identity, that there were other sides to the story. And realizing that I had to have an identity that suited me and that is emotional as giving up U.S. citizenship can be for some. And again, I took me a while to come to the conclusion, and I did it, and I won't look back. But I also realized I didn't want to have those negative emotions about being a part of something that I didn't entirely agree with. And it was painful to see the impact of that on somebody else. And I learned, and I really crystallized for me, the whole issue of identity. So the question is, where do I go from here? And this is something that I've also learned from friends and colleagues and people that I work with in countries like Serbia. Serbians cannot go to the United States without a visa. There are some countries that Serbians cannot go to without a visa, or other countries. And no doubt, not being a U.S. citizen, I will have the ability to go to a couple fewer places in the world. So far, we made a video here about, going to Thailand. I got a Thai visa. Took about a day and cost $37. It was very easy. I got a visa to go to Japan. Took about a week, very easy. Very pleasant people. One of the things I talk about with the people I help is you're never going to fully understand this stuff until you do it. That's part of why it's, in my opinion, good to have a mentor. And one of the things that I've done over the last 10 years is try and figure this stuff out without much of a mentor. It would be a lot easier if I had myself, if I had Nomad capitalists to look back on and kind of help me and guide me through the process. Not only the procedural stuff of which company to get, which bank to get, which passport to get, but the emotional stuff, because I think that really nobody talks about this. So many people in our space are they hang on so much to, the man of mystery. Let me use a fake name. Let me hide my identity. Let me be the badass. That they don't identify the stuff that I think people really think about. The fears, the insecurities. And as men, in particular, I think that we tend to step over those fears and step over those insecurities because we don't want to appear weak. But we still have them. We still wonder what's going to happen. And so what I tell people is you're not going to understand how the entire process works unless you either have been through it, in which case I now have a greater clarity of how it works, or unless you have a mentor who has really sat down and studied, how this process works and what the feelings are, what you need, what you have to do, etc. One of the things that I've learned is that, depending on which passports you have, getting visas can be relatively straightforward. Not all visas, but for me, in the places where I want to go, and the places that I think are the future, and where I want to call home, I'm very confident in the strategy that I have now. If I want to go to New Zealand, I'm going to have to get a visa, and I went through a process lately, And it is not as easy as Thailand or Japan for somebody like myself who is constantly on the move. I've also realized, and I'll talk about this in another video, that I want to slow down a little bit because I've basically seen most of the countries I think that have potential, and I want to spend more time in those places and not be on the go as much, which also supports this decision. But you know, you can still obtain residence permits. You can still obtain visas. You can still go many places visa-free. I mean, where I'm at right now, just came visa-free, 90 days, same as an American. For me, not a lot has changed. Now, your situation may vary. I don't have a great need to go to the United States. There will be a process if I want to do that. And obviously, you know, I'm going to continue just doing the things that I really geek out on, which is getting residence permits, you know, doing the immigration stuff. I don't really think a lot changes. What I do feel is a sense of freedom. And not only because, oh, okay, now I don't have to file a tax return anymore, because I do have to file a final tax return this year. It is partially that, hey, I do feel a sense of freedom and a detachment from all these, that sense of dread that I talked about, but I also feel much more aligned from an identity point of view. That, you know, when you're an American and you don't agree with the things that, you know, the U.S. stands for, you don't really feel like you connect with the average American. Certainly I work with largely Americans. I work with U.S. citizens, Australians, Canadians largely. And the people that I work with and the people that I met with last week, for example, I mean, they totally get what we're talking about. You get what we're talking about. But the average person in the United States, I never really got along with. And so now, not having to say, hey, you're a U.S. citizen, I'm a U.S. citizen, it feels much more peaceful for me. And I meet people from the U.S. in various places, met some in the lobby yesterday, and it's like, hey, you know what? That's cool. That's your identity, and mine is something else. And there's really a great relief for me that has come. But I don't think anything else has changed. I mean, I remember, just for fun, I went out and set up a new offshore company just to do a little research and development, but also just to kind of celebrate, hey, I don't have to file a form for this anymore. Obviously, some are going to speculate. Some are going to say, "Oh, this is just the latest guy who just doesn't want to pay." I was already very optimized in that regard. This, for me, is about me as a private citizen. I'm doing this video because I think that nobody else in this field has done this. And if they have, then they won't stand up and talk about it. Is there some risk to me doing this? Maybe. But I believe that you deserve the truth. I deserve that people who are out there who are considering this deserve to know that there's somebody who supports them and who understands them. And that this is not just a technical process, because the people who come to me asking, should I renounce? Do I want to renounce? I do want to renounce. I think that having mentorship is what they really crave. They want to know, how does this work? They want to know what's involved. And so that's what I want to provide. And I want people to know that there is someone who understands them, even if that means that I will be the subject of some nasty comments, or the haters coming and saying he did it for this or that reason. I know what's in my heart. I know why I did it. Again, there are certain parts of this process that will remain private to me because it's a very personal process. But I wanted to tell you this because I think it's important that you understand that there are a lot of misconceptions about it. The U.S. government does not have to be your enemy. And if you approach it that way, you probably will not succeed. But you will have your own reasons if this is something that you want to do. And there is a process to figuring it out if this is something that you should do if you are living the lifestyle that we talk about here. I am happy to help people who are trying to figure this out. Whether you're trying to figure out whether you should do it, whether you're in the process, whether you want to do it, and you just kind of want to figure out how do you strategize to do that. Obviously, I have learned a lot going through this process, and I'd be happy to help. Of course, nomadcapitalist.com, we take a very limited number of people who want the kind of mentorship I'm talking about and who want a strategy. This is something that I would have done with or without Nomad Capitalist. But I think that having a megaphone to talk to millions of people and let them know that they're not alone is important. And that's why I made this video. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your comments here. I appreciate your taking the time to watch the video. I hope that this has helped people who are looking to better understand the process. I understand it's not going to make sense to everybody, but it is something that I think needs to be clarified, because this is a process that is very opaque, and people deserve to know how it works. And perhaps by talking about it, some folks will realize they don't want to do it. But there it is. So, my name is Andrew Henderson. NomadCapitalist.com is the website. And I'm going to continue to do my research, do my development, the R&D as we call it here, right? And no doubt this will make some of the parts of doing R&D a little bit easier. There might be a few things that are a bit tougher as a non-US citizen, but I'm going to keep doing what I'm going to be doing regardless. And appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. For NomadCapitalist.com, I'm Andrew Henderson. Thanks for watching.